say both. I've conducted 2, and I will say both of them went on well beyond 60 minutes because people actually were interested in talking about it. But when I say it, what they were interested in talking about, it's partly very consonant with what we were interested in, and partly, maybe not. But anyway, there was a lot of interest in it. Alistair, I know, talked to 2 people. I don't know anything more about it, although I certainly had the sense. I think what he said was that they didn't follow it a lot, is my sense, because they were high star schools and maybe even new principals. I don't.
What do you mean they didn't follow it? Like they didn't
have a lot to say about it because it didn't affect them a lot.
Ah, gotcha.
I think that is I think I'm only putting words into his mouth that he said. Fraser has had 1 and has 1 more to go. He thought it was great. He loved having the conversation, and the principal had a lot to say. Zach has not done any. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jacques, I believe, has done at least 1, I think multiple, and I think he may have done some as a focus group, but I'm not sure.
Huh.
And I know at least 1, yeah. So that's what I know. So that's what I know.
So do we not know whether Carlene and Ebony Rose have been able to, or do we know that they have not?
I do not know. I actually texted Ebony Rose, and I have not heard back from her. I believe at one point she was interested. I mean, I'm trying to remember this. I think at one point she was quite interested because she was texting about, what we had and all that, but I haven't talked to her about it in a bit. And Carlene, I didn't ask because I figured she'd be here today.
So I need to call Carlene anyway, so I'll ask her. I'll just say I have 3 scheduled for next week. I'm sorry, I'm so behind on this, but 2 of the 3, I asked for an hour, and so I have an hour scheduled with them, and then 1 gave me 45 minutes on the calendar. So that's all I have to report so far, but they should be interesting because they're all 1 or 2 star schools. And they're kind of they're middle, either educational campuses or middle school, which I know we needed more representation from. So I will report back.
And I'll say, I'm hoping to still do 1 more, but I will say we lost more than a quarter of our principals, which we've never done before. So sort of finding people who have been here for 2 years is a challenge. So one thing on this that is a little that's kind of relevant to what you were raising, Jessica, is it doesn't specifically speak to your concern, and I'm not sure how to, without knowing more, how to speak to that. But one thing I did think could be useful and interesting would be to convene. Maybe it's at the working session if there's time, or and if we do it separately, it'll be harder to get people. But to just be able to have sort of an informal conversation among all of us about what we learned, because Darren will put this together, he'll compile everybody's notes into, a compilation of some sort. But I think it would be interesting to have people just sort of talk about what they learned and get it back and forth in that. Because one of the things that I'm concerned about, and as part of what I have later in the agenda, is just, to create sort of a back and forth and a sharing across all of us about what we're finding and what our issues are, so that as we move into September, people have some sense of, what they want to know. I mean, for me, I'm more aware of what it is I want to know and don't know after I've had conversations, and I just want to get those going so everybody can have that sense.
I know this is probably not enough time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to that. I think that all makes sense, Ruth. I think my concern is that 5, 7, and 8 are wards with the most schools and most students. And if we don't know the status of those interviews or run up against the time frame where we don't have any interviews from 5, 7, or 8, I would worry about proceeding with information and saying, well, here's what we were able to learn. So that's one concern I've got. The second is, I just think we should be mindful of how much sort of weight we give to what we hear in interviews versus what we hear in surveys. If we are able to get more consistent survey responses than we are in interviews. So I had an interview with an elementary school principal in Ward 6 who was happy to talk about STAR and offered some really good insights, including, very candidly, like the parts of STAR that he doesn't really understand. And it's sort of like, I'm at a loss then for how to explain it to my staff, and they definitely don't understand it. So that was a really helpful insight, but we only talked for 15 minutes about STAR. Another principal was very eager to talk. We only got 20 minutes because of crises at the school. This was a high school principal, and asked that I keep everything off the record. So I've got to be thoughtful about how I share it because there was real concern about how it might be received. So just for that reason, I just hope that we'll consider how we decide when we're done and how we decide what weight we give to interviews, which may have taken different forms and shapes, versus the survey, which seems like it may be more consistent.
Two responses on that. One, on the off the record, very, very important. And I communicated with Darren about this morning when I sent in my notes. I have the same issue. I promised everybody total anonymity, and just the way it works, there can be identifying information just because there's only a certain number of schools in a given ward that are a certain level, a certain STAR, and a certain this, right? So we really have to be very careful not to report it out in any way that can be done. And I also would suggest, and I mentioned this to Darren, I think on the form itself, it asks you to give a school name, and I would not put a school name. I just called it Principal 1 and Principal 2, just so that that's never an issue.
Good.
So that's, and I think, in fact, I'll send out an email to people about that, and just also as a way to just remind people to let us know what's going on. The other thing on the how we report stuff, there's two things. What do we make sort of public in terms of it's a report? The other is, how do any of us take anything? And my view on this, which I've said, all the way through in terms of the presentation, surveys and everything, for all of us, we all have 100 data points, 1,000 data points. We have a lot of data points. We talk to people all the time. It comes up at meetings. We talk, we all have a lot of data points, and people like us who've been on for the board for longer and talked about this longer, we have even more. So I don't think any of these is singular, and any single one of them is likely to have an enormous impact on anybody, unless it really turns out to be overwhelming and, sort of alters or flies in the face of something that any of us thought. But it is a way to, get a general sense, and so that we can know if what we think we know really doesn't jive, and be able to converse with each other about what we're finding, and be able to see what's true in different wards that we would then also want to triangulate with what members had thought. So I just want to say, I don't know that anyone, for me, no particular set of reports, whether it's the principal interviews or anything else, they're all going to be added into lots of other stuff, all the information we get from the presentation. So that's just, but I agree with you, no single thing, certainly not if it's missing a bunch of principles, should have overweight. And that is something to think about if we compile it and publish it. I agree with you. So we could do one of two things. We could either just unconvene and try to get back together, although I worry about when we'll be able to do that, but maybe you're on Wednesday, Jessica, your meeting?
Yeah, we're Wednesday.
So possibly next Thursday, I don't know. One thing, there are two big things I wanted to do today. One is to sort of think about how we're going to handle September and make sure everybody is prepared for what they have to do in September, and then facing a vote in October, and how we're going to sort of ourselves as a committee prepare recommendations. That's one thing. The second thing is Darren has pulled together so these interactive activities for the presentation. And, it's been thank you very much, Darren. I mean, it's just really hard to figure all this stuff out and how you do it in a virtual environment. And I think he's got some really good ideas for me. Two of them work really well. One of them we want to get other input on. So if people have time, I think it would be helpful to see them and give him that input. So, and then somewhere we're going to need, I need this conversation back and forth about how to approach October, but maybe we should try to wait for that for the others.
Can I ask one question about the September outreach?
Yes.
Is there a thought on like similar to what you did for the principal interviews, like a recommended level of engagement we're asking members to take? So I'll give as an example. I already asked WIXPO, which is what I call CHIPSPO now, because I would like them to pick an acronym that was easier to say, but WIXPO, if I could use their September meeting. And Suzanne and Sandra both said yes. So I have that on the calendar. I have also reached out to a couple of ANCs, and some have responded, but August is their recess time as well. So others have not responded. And my sense is that some of the ANCs in Ward 6 are more interested in schools and others less. ANC 6A and ANC 6B are very interested in schools. ANC 6C sort of nods politely when I come speak to them and says nothing. ANC 6D is a little bit more interested, and ANC 6E is also sort of like nod politely. So I'm not sure what the uptake will be, and I'm not sure I can make all of their meetings, because some of them, two of the ANCs have meetings on the same night, and if we've only got September to do it, I can't do that. And others have already set their calendar for September because they're a little type A about that. Like they set their September calendar in July. So I'm curious, like if you've got a sense of like parameters, or if the Education Council is enough.
Oh, I see parameters about how many to go talk to. I thought you were talking about what we're gonna. I see. I thought you were talking about what we're gonna say, but
yeah, no, like
so,
who we're engaging
right.
with, and saying we did an adequate engagement.
So I think in some email, and I can do it again, I sort of said something to the effect of, people are going to make their own choices about who to engage with, including, and then I sort of had a list, your local ward council, ANCs, PTOs.
Yep, I apologize. I don't want to I remember this email. I think my question is, like the principals, you asked each of us to do 3.
Right. No. I hear what
sorry. The reason I'm asking is because you, if I'm correct, have 11 schools in Ward 3. I have 36. So I can't go to 36 PTO meetings, plus 5 ANCs, plus the Ed Council, all in the month of September. It's simply impossible. And both Carlene and Ebony Rose have more schools than I do. So is there a minimum level that you're asking folks to do as part of the total package?
So that's what the reason I was setting it up that way is to say this is, we are all politicians in our local wards and have to sort of figure, and I think people have different ways of reaching out, and I'm wary of overly prescribing, right? I mean, people have different ways of doing it with different communities. So I'm totally up for recommendations and suggestions about how to say it. I mean, we could say how many we're each doing. Some people do PTO, some schools don't have PTO, so they do it other ways. Some people, do ANCs, other people don't do ANCs. So but people have different ways, right? Or they go to community,
Yeah, I get that. I guess I'll speak plainly. if you go to every school PTA in Ward 3, it would be unfair to expect that Ebony Rose could do the same in Ward 7. And then we would have an overrepresentation of engagement in Ward 3 as compared to Ward 7. And that would seem deeply inequitable, given what we know about the population of students, both in number and demographics, between 7 and 3. So how do we acknowledge that everyone does things in a way that is suited to their context and their style, but also aim for equity in making sure that our residents are engaged in a way that is appropriate? I get it's a challenge. I'm not suggesting there's a perfect answer. I just think that's something we should grapple with.
What if you did do something similar, Ruth, as you did with the principals, as Jessica's suggesting, where you, and maybe it would start more organically by asking the folks with the most schools in their wards what they think would be doable, and going from there, like the rest of us then following suit. You know what I mean? Like if, say,
yes, no, but here's what I don't understand is, all year long, we all make decisions about who we talk to and when. So it's not like if I'm not going to tell anybody you can only go to 2 meetings. People are going to go to the meetings they're going to go to, or maybe they're not going to do formal meetings on this, but if they're at some other meeting, they're going to raise it, right? So I just don't see how in a democratic body you tell anybody you can't have more meetings or you can't have more discussions. So that's what I think one thing that's fair, totally fair to say, Jessica, is that we did talk about aggregating the stuff out of the presentation activities into sort of some sort of data. And I think it's totally fair to say, if one group, one ward has many more examples of that, they only put one set in, so you can't overweight the data. I think that's totally fair. Other than that, I think
I respect that, Ruth. I think it's a point well taken that you can't tell people not to have more meetings. I think the difference between this particular thing and the way we engage all year is that we're using this information to make a set of recommendations about a statewide policy that exists. And we do that a fair bit, right? We're going to aggregate all the feedback we got at the public meeting. But there we did a little bit of an all call. And I'll say, having done an all call, Ward 6 showed up in spades. You heard from a lot of Ward 6 residents last night. I think that is not surprising, but also potentially problematic, because you got one very clear set of views from Ward 6 parents, many of whom fall into the same racial and socioeconomic demographic. And that, I think, should be something we reflect on as we weight our recommendations, right? Like a lot of our recommendations are general health and safety, but there are some things that were asked for from a group of parents who were definitely overrepresented in last night's data set. I just want to figure out how we're going to approach that with respect to what we call data and how we use that data to inform our recommendations. I guess I'm less concerned about the data collection and more concerned about how we use the data we collect.
Then I totally agree with you. That's totally fair. I agree. How to, and as an example from the meeting, there's a lot of data from all the people who came, right, to your point. But in the end, the letter is from the 9 of us, and each of the 9 of us have the same weight, right? So whether or not, 10 people came last night to talk about safe passage, we know that there are reps who are going to make sure that safe passage is in there. There
right.
was, and I don't know that anyway, so that's, I think, part of how we do it is we have to rely on our colleagues to provide the additional information, and we all have our choices about how we're going to weight that. But to your point, we should all be very cognizant about where the students are and where we're hearing opinions from. And we can make that point. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah,
Does that
I
help?
think that's,
I mean,
that's
sort of
my,
general.
that's my area of concern. So as long as we can continue to grapple with that as we get the information and think about how it informs our recommendations, that's fine.
And also, and to that point, I mean, I going back to something that came up earlier, I mean, so I have this sense that some people do a lot more informal chats with parents in all different kinds of settings. And that's not gonna, maybe they can use those settings to make sure people fill out surveys. Actually, maybe we might suggest that to bring surveys, is a
Yeah.
way to do that. But it's also, some of them, they're not going to be surveys. And again, it sort of falls on both the rep having the conversations and other reps to hear them out about what the issues are, I think.
Yep.
But point well taken. Okay. So do you guys have time to watch these activities and comment? You up for that?
I mean, if you think it would be helpful for us to do it now and do it again with Jacques and Carleen, I'm happy to do it. I do want to make sure that they also get the chance to watch it.
I think what would be helpful, and Darren, you can comment, I think it would be helpful to Darren to get feedback so he can, do whatever it is to make them better, if that is what is called for. And then tomorrow, I was going to say this, our plan is to send out, I hope, a revised PowerPoint with these activities. And then everybody will have a chance, to the committee tomorrow. And then everybody can look at both the activity, the revised activities, or where they'll be the same, and the whole thing, and comment. So the answer is yes, I think it would be helpful to Darren, but Darren can speak to just have one set of input before he does a round of revisions on it. And then I think for the others, either we'll set up a time, either they'll just do, Darren and I will try to figure out a way they can do it on their own, or we can set up a little thing. The problem is we have to move forward. And so we may just do one-on-one or something. We'll have to see how we're going to do that.
Did Jacques already have input on this version?
Not on this version. And Carleen is not coming. I now have that official.
I would recommend, this is everything, almost everything here is visual and something that would need to be walked through with the members. So I know we're on a timeline, but I think this is something that is it's important for members to be walked through the different activities.
No,
to
I
get the
agree.
feedback.
I agree. I'm just saying, schedule wise, it may be that has to be more on a one-on-one basis, because we're not going to get 4 people together. That's what I worry about. Not that
I
we
can
won't.
hold next Thursday if we want to try for next week.
Right, but here's the thing. What I don't know is when others can get together, right? So we may end up just doing them all singly. I don't know. But I'm happy to do that. We can do that. But then,
Right.
and Darren, in terms of the timeline, we do have to have a final on September 1. That's just, we have to, because people are going to start doing their presentations. So that's why we may need to do them individually or not. All right, so my sense is we should try to get people together, all together separately from this. Jessica, is that?
I think so.
Not,
yeah, I think so. One, I totally understand maybe going through it, one by one, but I think the interplay of comments would be helpful. Also, I just got a message that someone who I shall decline to name is willing to talk to me off the record with knowledge of the nurses contract. So I'd kind of like to go make that phone call and get us all as much information as I can about the nurses contract.
okay, that is good. Let me say this. I want to look at I'll poll people about possible times. I'd also,
Okay,
if we can do it earlier than Thursday, that's what we'll try to do, and we'll sort of see what happens, and we will do our very best. All right,
Cool.
well, with that, should we just adjourn and reconvene?
sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for what we got through.
Thanks
All right,
all.
bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.